Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on returning to more eco-friendly on-site events. My name is Mark Breakspear. I'm the AV Alliance Manager at Interprefy. With the help of some industry experts, we'll be discussing the current topic in the events industry today. As we see the gradual return of in-person events around the world, a pressing issue is sustainability and being environmentally or eco-friendly in our approach to running a live on-site event. So before we get on with the event, I'd like to bring in Wasif from vFairs, who's going to give you a little bit more information about this great virtual platform that we're on today. Over to you, Wasif.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for joining in today. Good afternoon. As you're in the auditorium, so just to tell you about, as you're on the vFairs platform, as you're on the session, you're in the auditorium right now. You'll see that to the right of the screen, you can access simultaneous interpretation into Italian and Dutch, as well as live captioning that's available in Spanish, French, Italian, and German. So all you need to do is click on the headphone button or the eye symbol that you see in that widget and select your choice of your language. If you're planning or to listen in Dutch, don't forget to disconnect your audio and for the webinar when you've selected your language. After the webinar, we have a lot in store for you. You can go back out to the lobby where you will see the exhibition hall. You can see the booths for Interprefy and vFairs. And we have our live teams available over there after the webinar. So you feel free to set up a conversation, chat live with them. And also you can access some nice documents and videos that we have for you. You can add them to your swag bag and download them as well. If you'd like to also go to the lounge, we also have different links of companies that have been involved in hosting this nice webinar for us, and we'll accordingly be happy to assist. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Wasif. Okay, and also I'd like to give a big thank you to our interpreters supporting us today, Camilla and Georgia in the Italian booth, and Ryben and Lean in the Dutch booth. Thank you very much, guys. So we're also going to have a couple of polls during the webinar, so please do participate in those. And of course, we encourage you to submit some questions for the panelists at the end of the event. Okay, so let's move on to some introductions of the panel this afternoon. We have Mohammed Tala Wasim, who's the sales manager of Europe at vFairs, our platform partner and host for today's event. Also with us is Adam Parry. He's the co-founder and editor of Event Industry News and director of Event Tech Live, the leading global event technology conference and exhibition. Last but not least, we have Ben Quarrell, co-founder of ILA. That's a non-profit organization focusing on a sustainable future for events. So welcome, guys. I think we're in for some very valuable insights into our topic of sustainability and how we make our on-site events more eco-friendly in the future. So let's kick off with some definitions. What do people mean when they talk about an event being eco-friendly? Should we start with you, Mohammed?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, absolutely. So as climate change is making itself more and more apparent around the world, both organizations and individuals are becoming more aware of the impact they have on the environment. The same applies to on-site events where they offer great value in terms of learning and networking opportunities. They emit a lot of carbon emissions. Eco-friendly on-site events aim to lower these emissions without compromising on engagement. A great example of this would be the much lauded carbon negative Tokyo Olympics from 2020. So carbon negative essentially means that the event actually removed more carbon than it emitted. They use 100% renewable energy, public transport was favored, and even the podiums and medals were made out of recycled materials. Sounds idealistic, but I would say that is definitely the gold standard for events.
Absolutely. Adam, what's your take on the definition of this whole sustainability, eco-friendly hype?
Oh, it's an interesting one. The definition is a very interesting term, and I think as an industry we're still going through what eco-friendly means. I can speak from my own experience and from what that means to us as an event organizer, or should I say more sustainable events. And it's our approach to how we produce that event. That's from venue choice, format, whether that be virtual, multi-hub, hybrid or in person alone. It can be supplier and vendor choice. And it can even be down to us how we are going about educating our attendees on how their attendance can have less impact through their own choices, whether that be their method of transport to the show or what they bring or take away from the event. I think Ben's probably much better positioned to put a real definition on it, but that's from our approach. That's how our team look at it. How are we measuring our impact and what can we do to change even 1% of that along the way?
Absolutely. So Ben, this is what you do day to day, right? So what's your take on things?
So definitions are very tricky, and I think what's really challenging in such a busy world is that everybody wants something that explains what they're doing in a sentence. Carbon negative event sounds brilliant. What it doesn't show is that it takes 50 years to take the carbon out of the atmosphere that took 3 days to emit it. So again, is that eco-friendly? So I think what it's really important not to reduce everything to labels. And I think at Isla, we launched to create a community to help educate the industry and move events towards a more sustainable future. And we've got various tools to do that. And a lot of it is about making sure you're better than your last event. And that's why we created Trace, which is a carbon measurement platform that allows you to, instead of kind of putting your finger in the air and going, oh, we think we used some recycled materials here, or we did this, you can go, this is exactly what we did, and these are our carbon emissions, and here's a plan to reduce that by 25% the next time we do an event, or we estimate it at the beginning and reduce it as we plan. And then in that way, you might not have your snapshot going, I had an eco-friendly event, but what you can say is you can say that you took sustainability very seriously and you can report on your progress. And I think across the board, there's so much talk around greenwashing and people wanting to say snapshots. So what's really important is to understand everybody is on a journey. The events industry right now isn't very sustainable, but everybody's at somewhere in their journey, and it's important to be transparent and open about the progress so that you can inspire other people to follow rather than sort of shame people into not even starting because they're worried everyone's better than them.
Absolutely, and it's obviously not just a section on the event plan. This is about results. This is about, like you said, measurement, about making a real difference in the way you produce events. So how is it different now compared to, say, a couple of years ago? And personally, I think that obviously we're coming out the other end of a pandemic. I think sustainability and being eco-friendly was almost forced upon us in a way, because we couldn't travel, we couldn't meet in person. All those elements that normally create quite a large impact on the environment weren't possible. And now we're getting back to on-site events and getting back into meeting in person. We're actually finding that some of these elements that we've been practicing for the last couple of years aren't that hard to translate into an on-site event as well. So yeah, how is it different today compared to attitudes and processes a couple of years ago?
I think pre-pandemic, sustainability was still something to be talked about, and it was very much the minority of the industry actually doing something meaningful. Whereas it's, as you rightly said, the pandemic shone a light on so much behavior that can be changed, and since then we've seen a real snowball effect of intent turning into action across the industry. And
I think to add to what Ben said there, we went through a period, I think, like you said, Mark, that we really didn't have any other choice, and arguably on impact, the events industry over those 2 years was probably the most sustainable it's ever been, but not through choice. And we have to remember as an industry that without those in-person events, that wouldn't have translated to 90% of the virtual events that did take place over that period. So going forward, we need to find a harmonious way to leverage technology, but to also still have in-person events. And I think technology has got a big role to play in that. But as Ben said, we now have an opportunity to start afresh and start to measure what we are doing going forward. There are some great tools out now, which Isla produce and others are producing. There's some great consultants out there. One thing I'm ever so concerned about is the pressures around budget and timescales that everybody is under at the moment, especially moving back to in-person, because when there's those pressures, budget, timescales, often we choose the cheapest or the quickest option, not the most sustainable option. So that's one thing I think we need to, as an industry, be mindful of over the next couple of years, is our decision-making process about what we're doing.
Adam, you're absolutely right. And we've actually experienced something very similar to what you've said. But because we do more than 300 events in a month, people are now more aware of the environmental impact of events. Like what we've seen is that a one-day virtual event with 200 attendees results in carbon emissions equivalent to that of driving 3,300 miles or burning 1,500 pounds of coal. If that's held face-to-face, that same event would generate around 66 times more carbon emissions. Now, with virtual events still have an environmental impact starting from increasing internet use, like the electricity needed to power internet with its associated carbon, water, and land footprints, is not the only thing affecting the environment. Data transmission and storage also necessitate water to cool the equipment with data centers. However, what we've seen is that the majority of our customers are aware of the positive impact of virtual and hybrid events on the environment, as opposed to in-person events.
That's right. I mean, I think when virtual events happen, there's a huge amount of resources that do go into them. You quite often have production studios. You have a huge amount of power being used, and so I think it's quite important to think that although virtual events obviously have a much less impact on the environment, there is still a lot of elements like the ones you just described that can affect it. That's worth considering, even if it is entirely virtual. So let's go. How do we measure these events? If I come to Ben now, Ben, your platform is obviously designed to help people measure in an efficient way, help make improvements. What are these elements that you're measuring, and how do you measure them?
So if you think of an event in its purest form, you have elements of production, so set build, graphics. You have elements of food and drink, catering, water. You have travel and transport, so audience travel, logistics, and staff travel, everything related to that. And then you have energy as well. So that'd be like your energy usage on site, whether you're using diesel generators. They're kind of like your 4 key areas of emissions. And the way to, when you're looking to measure an event for the first time, you'll find a carbon calculator, so like Trace that we've got, will sort of split out the areas that you need to collect data in. And if it's designed intuitively, the data that you need to collect is in a very similar format to the data your suppliers will be able to provide for you. So for instance, when we built Trace, we looked at the data that event planners are already capturing, and then how to use to get a carbon footprint from that, rather than going to a carbon consultant and going, how do I measure my production build? What you need to do is you ask your suppliers, okay, what materials are you using? Here's a template of like all the materials that we measure. Pick the nearest one if you haven't got that, and then you literally copy it into Trace, and it goes, okay, this is your carbon footprint, and this is how you can reduce it. So trying to make it as easy as possible to give the data that event planners need to make better decisions without being a carbon consultant. And that's the way you measure, really, because it can be complicated and you can get down a rabbit hole, but you just need to keep it simple, look at what your biggest impact areas are, and then work out how to reduce them.
Have you seen a change in attitude about sustainability, about people that are really interested in having that as a part of their event plan, and what are people looking for these days in terms of getting contracts and promoting themselves?
Yeah, it's gone from, how do I sell it into my business? How do I make a business case? To our clients are asking us for this, and I'm winning pitches based on the fact that I haven't just saying, here's my sustainability policy. I'm telling my client how I'm going to measure their event, and I'm winning business and becoming more profitable by being a leader in the industry. And I think that's the real shift, is that the people that aren't asking for it are getting called out by their clients. Their clients are saying, if you can't do this, we'll take our business elsewhere. And the ones that are really reaping the rewards.
So by having a solid sustainability plan, people are winning contracts over others that don't, right?
Yes, lots. It's happening a lot across the industry.
Fantastic. Adam, can we talk about Event Tech Live? What's your take on sustainability at a big event like that? Let's get some real world experience.
Thank you, Mark, for calling it a big event. It's a moderate size event compared to some of the events industry event. Our approach, and we have just started measuring. It's been 8 years before we've really started measuring our impact on our events. And that's with some great contacts in the industry as well. We're a small team. It just sometimes takes time to get into that habit of actually spending time looking at it. But our approach very early on was, if it doesn't have an impact on experience, then does it matter? So we are a trade show. We are an exhibition. Very often you see trade shows with meters upon meters upon meters of carpet, which has to be brought into the venue. It has to be laid out. So that means there's got to be staff, and then it's got to be taken out of the venue and possibly disposed of or recycled. Something like that was a very simple thing to go. It doesn't really make a huge difference to the experience of the event. The floor is good enough. Let's not do that. And that was one of the ways that we chose to hopefully be a more sustainable trade show than maybe others. We also harness technology to try and encourage, as much as humanly possible, exhibitors not printing and bringing leaflets and pamphlets and attendee literature to the show, and actually use the event app or the smart badging systems and things like that we got on site for that digital collection of the content. And then we have been a big proponent of live streaming and being a hybrid event way before the pandemic. Actually, we started live streaming content from our event probably 3 years prior to 2020. There's lots of other different things. We have recycling, we have partnerships in place with other people that help us have a more sustainable approach. But our biggest shift now is to really start looking at the data and kind of looking at those micro actions and those micro decisions that we can make a change on. And our venue choice, we've just moved to Excel. They are a very sustainable venue in London. You might not think it, but they have huge amounts of things going off in the venue. And again, that is part of our choice in how we tackle sustainability from our event.
It's very much not about just looking for the most sustainable solutions. It's about measuring how you are, getting a benchmark for how you run your events, and then looking for future events, how you improve on that.
Just to add there, I think decisions made at the early planning stage can significantly influence the types of environmental impacts that arise from the event. So therefore, a good practice is to establish a baseline environmental assessment at the start of the preparation phase, and a plan to deliver the event with environmental sustainable features. So for instance, we have the mobile app, which connects virtual and in-person attendees at all times. So even if you're at an in-person event, instead of using brochures and all kinds of marketing material, we have the app, which is there to enable attendees to look at all kinds of information in contrast to looking at information by holding paper. And secondly, we also encourage different clients of ours to host events near areas where you have accessibility to public transport. That also kind of reduces the overall, the carbon side of things.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think we say to people to look at what you can control and look at what you can influence, and look at those impact areas. And you're totally right that you have the most control over things at the beginning of a project. If you start trying to measure and improve things right at the end when everyone's going crazy before going on site, you're kind of setting yourself up to fail, really. So it makes sense to start early.
Mark, if I could just add a really important thing that Ben mentioned earlier, it was around attitudes, and Ben was specifically talking about client attitudes towards suppliers and things like that. I think one thing that I'm starting to see is the attitude of attendees and their choices when it comes to events, right? There is a challenge at the moment. We're seeing numbers of in-person events grow back, but they're still not at pre-pandemic levels of 2019 levels across the board. In certain regions, they are better. I know the Asia Pacific and those regions are obviously still heavily battling with COVID and lockdown and stuff, so they're very heavy virtual still. But we have to understand that the mindset of the generations below me certainly are changing in terms of their choices, what products they buy, what solutions they buy, which events they go to. And I think one of our biggest tools in attracting an audience to our event, whether that be virtually or physically, will be us explaining how we approach our event and how we make the least amount of impact possible. A great industry event for us that does that actually on an ongoing basis is IMEX. They have a dedicated page. They do a report each year. They have lots of information on the show floor about their approach. And I think that for me is something that we need to consider as event organizers going forward, is that if we want to attract people back to in person, is that part of our storytelling? Is that part of the way that we win the hearts and minds of people that are coming to our event? Absolutely.
I've read a number of interesting facts about sustainability from some of our marketing team. So a recent study in Europe said that 75% of people in Europe would quite happily pay more for a product that's sustainable, which shows that even now the current trend is going that way. And I think you're right in that us as an industry in the present day, it's our duty to pass on this ethos, this way of thinking to those that are going to be taking our place over the years. So it's really a case of changing the trend in the industry. And I think most people, in fact all people, I think are very they're very up for following that lead. Let's go to Mohammed. How are you doing on your sustainability on your events there?
That's a good question. So the way we are seeing it is that event professionals are starting to become more environmentally conscious in 2022. This helps us. Climate disasters is just looming over our heads. Like, we have to go a long way, but event organizers have at least started to think that, they started to think in the positive or right direction. Many on-site events are now hybrid, which means that they offer both in-person and online attendance. They also host like smaller venues with fewer people. That is, a great win for the environment. Even event professionals are also spending more on digital marketing as opposed to conventional marketing. That is also helping us move in a greener direction. So that's that's our take on the environments for events.
Cool. Okay, so let's go to, we've touched on a few points already, but how can event organizers make events more eco-friendly? What is the main points they should be focusing their efforts on?
I think Adam hit the nail on the head talking about venue choice. I think, if you think about various estimates, anywhere between 70 and 90% of an event's emissions can be audience travel. If you can work out where your audience is going to be and put an event closer to that, then you're going to reduce a lot of emissions. And if you can do smaller hubs with hybrid, if you think about the fact that, we're in a position where we're looking to reduce global emissions 50% by 2030. And it's not to say, right, we need to can in-person events, but if you can do an event that would have been for 100,000 people and you can do 5 events for 10,000 people and then stream to 50,000 people, your emissions are going to be much lower and your engagement is going to be just as high, if not higher. So there's that. And then there's the other things that have already been mentioned in terms of making sure you're, it's a build and burn culture historically. It's like, don't just get everything in Fomex at the last minute and chuck it away. Look what you can reuse. How can you, and also another really big thing that often gets forgotten about is food and food waste. So a third of food that's produced across the planet is wasted. And if you can eliminate, if you eliminate a quarter of, if you have a quarter of your food being wasted and you can eliminate that, that's a quarter of your food emissions. Also, people are always shocked by how much fewer emissions you get from plant-based food than you do on beef. It's like multiple times the amount of emissions from a beef meal than there is from a plant-based meal. So it's trying to not say don't have any meat, but the meat you do have, make sure it's, you're heroing it. And definitely that's a really easy win to reduce your carbon emissions.
Right, Adam. Over to you, Adam. What are your thoughts?
You know what, Ben's really hit the nail on the head there for me, because I think, and we've seen it at our own events, over catering or people not turning up and not showing. And this goes back to this idea, for me, this idea of we constantly need to be engaging with our attendees and our audience and educating them on what their impact means and how they can work with us as event organisers collaboratively to lessen that impact. And I just want to share an interesting kind of story from early days of my first foray into the events industry. I went to an event, and believe it or not, the ticket price was £5, but what you were buying for that £5 was actually your burrito for that event. So it was kind of an after work thing, and it was a tech startup pitch competition. So it was like you bought that. And I asked the event organizer, like, why did you introduce this? And he was like, well, we want to cater for people. We understand that it's after work and, it's a choice between going home or coming to us. But our drop-offs were like always 50, 60% of people. So it was really hard to judge for how much we catered for. So we introduced the whole idea of, well, pay us a £5 and we'll provide you with dinner. He said, our drop-offs just went out of the window. Everybody turned up, and we never had an under catering. So it just goes back to, I think it's that format choice. It's how we're educating our audience. It's how we're working collaboratively with them and suppliers all across the board to lessen our impact. And as Ben said, I think one of the exciting things for me now that technology has come on leaps and bounds in the last 2 years is that multi-hub, multi-spoke format of maybe handing the baton on from one region to another, attendees still being able to connect with each other locally and have that in-person experience, but not having to travel across the Atlantic or further to experience an event from a couple of days, and actually a huge amounts of time efficiency around that as well. So yeah, that's what I think in terms of how we should be approaching things at this moment in time.
I like Mohammed's point about using event technology to not only bring benefit, but also to increase your sustainability. For instance, having all your the documents that you're sharing as app-based rather than having printouts upon printouts. In my time, I've done so many events, and some of them for actual events where the topic was renewable energy. And then after the event, you're loading up the trucks and you see these pallets upon pallets of branded notepaper that weren't used. And again, first of all, how do you estimate how many pads of paper you're going to need? And also how contradicting in the whole message of your event. Having so much wastage for something that's meant to be a topic of completely the opposite. So I think having the everything digitized and available on the app not only gives you the ability to update it really, really easily, but also completely removes the need to waste paper. Obviously at Interprefy, we provide the opportunity to have interpreters that are working on the platform like they are today from anywhere in the world, which means you're not having to, a few more people, you're not having to fly in, you're not having to feed, you're not having to put up in hotel accommodation and create all these the carbon emissions for those points. Carbon emissions for average event attendee around about, Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, around about 400 pounds of CO2 a day, I've heard, which then if you put in their extensive travel, it can go up to 2,000 pounds a day per attendee. So even just a few people not flying in is going to have a fairly big impact.
Yeah, there's so many different benchmarks, and I'm always reluctant to give them because of the fact of a benchmark for a in-person event, people flying from across the world, to be very different from a benchmark for an event that's very local. So I think that's part of the issue, is that there haven't been benchmarks before. So one of the things we're doing at Isla is the data that we're capturing from the hundreds and hundreds of events from Trace will be anonymized and aggregated into an industry-wide report where you're going, okay, this is a benchmark footprint for this type of event. And these are the biggest emission drivers across the industry at scale. And this is what we need to do, engaging with industry and on an infrastructural level to reduce that, whilst at the same time giving the individual companies emissions reduction advice on their journey as well. So because of the fact that currently there isn't the data on a large scale that the industry needs to really get recognition like governmental level on the support it needs to reduce emissions?
Absolutely. As adding on to what Ben has said, like what I've seen is that from our experience, the main challenge is limiting air travel, as travel alone contributes to about 70 to 90% of event total's carbon emissions. So again, the way we see it is that hybrid events are really the key, where through the mobile app, we can have a tool which connects virtual and in-person attendees, whether it's connecting them so that they could use the app to navigate or look at the map of the physical event, or whether it's used to look at sessions or interact with people. So I think that's the future going forward.
I totally agree. I mean, I've always been a fan of in-person events, and I think that completely virtual events certainly have their place. There's been some amazing platforms like vFairs that have come up and really flourished over the last few years. But what they've shown is the fact that when we're coming back on site, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be all virtual or all in person. You can benefit from having so much of a wider reach of audience by combining the two in this new hybrid format that is so common in so many of our events. I think I don't know, every event that you see has some kind of hybrid element, whether it's access to speakers who can't travel to the event, but they can now deliver as a remote caller to people in different time zones, be able to see the same events in whatever language they have. And I think hybrid it increases your size whilst reducing your carbon impact on the world, which is always going to be good. But so, in your opinion, Mohammed, obviously you're slightly biased, being from a virtual platform. But do you think that it's better to go all virtual, or do you think that we've got plenty of scope for both? Do you agree with what I've been saying?
I wouldn't say that we are ambassadors of virtual events only. It's all about what the customers feel and where is the industry moving towards. The way we see it is because we look at data. We do a lot of events on a monthly basis. And from data, what we've seen is that before the pandemic, people were not aware about the benefits of virtual events. Once they came into the pandemic, they found out through virtual events, you can look at data from a different level because everything is tracked once you enter into a virtual environment, whether it's registrations, whether they're sessions, or even the interactions that take place at the exhibitor halls. But once you look at the physical event side, there are also a lot of kind of notes that we have to take in, because with physical events, I know the human interaction level is there. And whenever you're having an interaction physical, the overall kind of expressions and the thought processes that you develop are much more superior. But the way we see it is that why I say hybrid events are the future, because what we've seen from COVID is that people were not able to travel to different venues. They were not able to kind of stay in different hotels and get the experience. But at the end of the day, a lot of companies that used virtual events, they were able to achieve their ROIs. A lot of our customers, which had shifted to virtual, think that the overall impact for their events is much more superior as opposed to it was for physical events before the pandemic. But now with the hybrid element, customers will be able to save a lot on costs, and at the same time have that element where they can still have the sessions going live. But if someone is on the go and is traveling, they can still attend the sessions through live streaming. So that's how I see it.
See, Adam, how much have you implemented in your on-site events? How much have you implemented the hybrid elements? Is that always a factor for you to try and increase your reach? Is that something you're going to be doing each live event you do?
It has been for a number of years, Mark. Yeah, I mean, we've always been under the pressure of utilizing technology, and let's be honest about it, virtual platforms, companies like vFairs, they didn't just overnight appear out of the pandemic, although some suppliers have. These guys were supporting events for many years before that. Us ourselves have live streaming companies, and we've had content and we've had technology that have allowed people to interact from outside of those 2 in-person days. We've taken the opportunity over the pandemic to play around with formats and see what sticks with our audience. some purely virtual, some purely in person, 5-day hybrid formats mixed with 2-day in persons, and going forward we're going to do a 3-day mix, so a dedicated digital day and 2 in-person days with content taken from that. I think the most sustainable thing that you can do with any event is capture your content and provide it on demand, because that's evergreen then, and people can always engage with it. And that's a great marketing thing as well, because you never know when somebody's going to come across your brand and your event and things like that. So it's always been a part of the blood and the life of Event Tech Live, and we've been very fortunate to have some great suppliers work with us to be able to give us the ability to do that. Because sometimes budget is a concern, right? And we've mentioned this all the way through. I know lots of people think that a sustainable choice is an expensive or costly choice. Not always necessary if you find the right partner and the right technology. But yeah, we've been very fortunate, and it's always been part of our strategy from early on.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, you talk about having things on demand. That obviously not only increases your reach to people that can't attend the live event, but also expands your reach to people that can't attend the events because of the time they're off doing something else, they're at another event. So having that ability to play back what happens, having recordings of the interpretation as well during the event enables you to reach a much wider audience. Obviously, you've got to think about what languages you want to support on events, what time zones your target audience is, and I think all that ability to have everything on demand, multiple languages, watch when you want, is really, really important. Right, so let's go on. If Adam, Ben, if we could go on to some simple tips for the events industry. If you want to have a start off with your sustainability plans, start off being a little bit more eco-friendly, where should you focus your efforts? If you're not only dipping your toe in the water of sustainability, but if you really want to start from the beginning, where's a good place to look at?
I think the first thing to do is to establish like an internal working group of sustainability champions. You want one person heading it up who's got overall responsibility, but you don't want it to fall on one person's shoulders, because it can fail. You want this is an issue that so many people are passionate about, that if you've got an event team of 15, 20 people, you won't struggle to find 4 or 5 people that can be your sustainability ambassadors. You can then start to, there's training available. There's lots of different training courses online. Isla offers training. There's lots of free resources. Isla's Proceed, which is PROSEED, is best practice framework that's free for event organizers. So, and you can just look at that. You can look at your event. You can have your sustainability kickoff. Look at what you can control, what you can influence, and all the tips you've already discussed. The thing about sustainability is it's not a surprise. When you find out the things you need to do to be more sustainable, it's not like anybody's making stuff up and going, "Oh, we need to be able to do this." It is. We're used to becoming experts in things in the events industry. So it really is a case of just making sure you empower your event planners to own the sustainability, impact of the event, and then give them the time and space to pick out the KPIs, start to measure, start to track, and then go from there, really. And it's that thing, if people get really overwhelmed on, it's such a big issue, I don't know where to start, because people have historically swung the doomsday clock, and it's very apocalyptic, and the world's going to end, and it's all going to burn, which it might. But the thing is that by saying that, you're scaring people. You're not inspiring people. What you need to be doing is thinking of, we've got a real opportunity here to reduce emissions across events, and that should be exciting rather than scary. And by inspiring people and giving them, the power to change the future of the industry, you can then start to make real big changes. And also, what Adam touched on is you can influence the people that are attending your events. You've got quite a big impact on your own event, but if you can then influence 50, 100, 1,000 people that come into your event and more sustainable themselves, then the network effects of the impact you can create is enormous.
And does it actually have to cost more to be sustainable, in your opinion?
Yes and no. So some things will cost more, some things will cost less. Look, Adam just said we don't use carpet if we don't need to. That's not going to cost him any more than buying all this carpet that they're going to throw away. Look, great budget saving. Things like having, having a venue that's got renewable energy, not going to cost more. Vegan food over beef, not going to cost more. If you're building lots of sets of recycled materials, that'll cost more. If you hire sets, it won't cost more. So some things cost more, some things take a bit more time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that just because it's sustainable, it's going to cost more.
Absolutely. Now, talking about sets, because obviously there's a massive impact on sets, especially with exhibitions. You've not just got one stage, you've got every exhibition stand there. Obviously, we've got the choice of building it every time, or if it's a road show, shipping it between venues. But then how do you balance it between the carbon impact you're going to have from trucking it from one venue to another compared to rebuilding it each time and scrapping the materials afterwards? So you're trying to make a choice, but what's the right choice to make?
Without wanting to do too much of a plug, trace, right? You go into the platform, you go, okay, I'm going to build these sets, I'm then going to transport it here to here, that's this carbon emissions. Or if I build this 4 times and have this transport, it's this. And then you weigh up your carbon impact and your waste impact, because let's not forget, it's not just about carbon. If I'm building like 8 tons of sets that I'm throwing away in each location, but it's a slightly higher carbon impact to not have any waste, but only a little bit, then that might be the better option to do. But you can't make the decisions about the data, because otherwise you're just guessing. So it's not difficult once you've got the right software to plan that out against budget and against and build stuff as well. And if you can rent a load, you can rent a lot locally, and that's going to be the best of both worlds.
Exactly. I think it's a team effort with regards to an event. You don't get one event where there's just a single supplier involved. It's about making sure that those that you delegate responsibilities to have the same working ethos as you do as an event planner, right down to, like Adam mentioned about the venue that you pick, to the people that provide the catering. Everyone's got to have a kind of cohesive attitude to sustainability and making sure that impact on the event is as little as possible. But if obviously majority events will have some impact, I think you rightly said this negative impact. It's a little bit like negative calories of celery, isn't it? It seems to be a bit of a myth, but what can people do to counteract that?
So we're getting onto the offsetting question. I won't talk for days. So I think people need to remember, like I try and use an analogy here, that if I'm carbon neutral, it means that, okay, I've reduced my emissions and then I've offset the rest. But if you put it in money terms, if you're running an event that's breaking even, but you're spending the money today and it's taking 50 years to bring the cash in, you're going to go bankrupt very quickly because you're running out of cash. And that's very much the same with carbon emissions and offsetting. It will take 7 hours to emit roughly 2 tons of CO2 to fly from New York to London, but it'll take 35 years to offset that. So offsetting is a part of the solution, but it really has to focus on reduction first, because otherwise it's just dodgy accounting, because you're constantly going to look like you're carbon neutral and carbon negative, and then emissions are going to keep rising in the atmosphere, and you can't swindle the earth when you're trying to do your accountancy. Like, temperatures will keep rising. So I think offsetting is important, but you need to be focusing on reduction first and not just trying to get a carbon neutral badge, because you'll miss the point.
Absolutely. I think it's almost turning into a bit of a business, isn't it? The carbon offsetting projects, and they quite clearly claim that 80% of the money that you pay for your carbon credits will go to that to the whichever project they have, and the rest of it's going to line the pockets of the companies that are doing it. So I think you're absolutely right that reduction is the key. Mohammed, you want to say something?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to add into what Ben was saying, like, I believe that small steps earlier on can have a big positive impact at a later stage. For instance, decarbonizing the electrical grid for conferences, which are powered by renewable energy, such as solar panels. So the carbon footprint of such a conference could fall from 3/4. Having said that, even with virtual conferences, like turning your camera off during a video conference can reduce your environmental footprint in a meeting by 96%. So these are certain things. I know they're pretty small, but if everyone does it, then you can have a bigger impact for the entire environment.
Right. Okay. Right. So let's go on to. Just want to remind everyone that we do have a Q&A tab here. If you have any questions for Ben about Isla and his the Trace platform, anything for Adam Parry, anything about vFairs, Mohammed and Wasif will gladly answer, and obviously about Interprefy as well. We have got one question from Spencer asking, does Interprefy offer sign language? Yes, absolutely we do. Available within the widget, we can provide sign language, live captions, and obviously interpretation, like I hope you're all playing with today. So do put any questions in the text box there. We've still got 10 minutes left, so plenty of time to go on that. Now, I guess we go on some key takeaways for everyone. We should be able to fill the last few minutes nicely. We've talked about sustainability. We talked about the elements that are involved in sustainability. What's the highest cause of environmental impact? So, Adam, if we can start with you, what would you list as your key takeaway here today?
I might fill this 10 minutes up just myself. I think first of all, as Ben said, before you start tackling sustainability and start changing your event formats and everything under the sun, you need to start off with what you know, and that's what you've done before. There is a lot of help out there now. There's associate. I don't know if you are an association, Ben. I do apologise if you don't. Industry body. That's right. That like Isla, with free tools out there. There are great consultants out there. Bringing those consultants in just the same as you would like a health and safety consultant and a health and safety team. There are tons of information out there. I mean, Event Industry News produces a huge amount of content around sustainable approaches. We have the Sustainable Event Buyer's Guide if people are looking for resources on supply chain. And I think work collaboratively with your peers, with other event profs to discuss how they're approaching sustainability and how they're making their decisions and choices. We are a world of learning off each other by what other people are doing, and we should be tapping into this connected events industry, into the approaches that they're taking in order to go away. I think one of my other key takeaways, and I add this, is it seems like a mammoth task, but actually when you start breaking it down into smaller bite-sized chunks and actually create a culture internally of a sustainable approach, it doesn't seem as daunting and it seems more acceptable. And you know what? If you do measure and you're not happy with the results, at least you've got something to improve upon. I don't think anybody actually should be ever completely happy with the results that they get after an event when it comes to sustainability, because I'm sure there's always somewhere that can improve. But don't get disheartened. Don't let the fact that you might not get results when you start to measure that you don't particularly like as a reason not to, or to not continue. Because this is, we're a huge industry. You have like a 1.5 trillion impact in terms of GDP, a global economy. The events industry is not going away, but we have a collective, responsibility, I think, to work on this together. So yeah, whether that's my key takeaways or me just rambling on for 5 minutes, I'm not sure. But
Mohammed, let's go on to you.
So my main takeaways would be to consider adding a virtual component to your on-site event, because that will really boost your reach and help your event become both green and global. And other than that, the other thing I'd like to highlight is using an event app to digitalize your marketing collateral and event resources. I believe that is a neat way to combine all of the benefits of virtual events and on-site events, and also to make your event more accessible. So that's what I think should be done.
Excellent. Okay, let's hear from Ben. You've got plenty of time, buddy.
So I think I've probably said most of it already, so I'll be banging the drum again, but I think it's about reduction first, offsetting last. But really, it is about just having those champions and, giving people the time and space to learn and to start the journey. Because, if you don't do it, you're going to get left behind. That's the thing, is that everybody is going to win business by being sustainable. And if you look at every single brand major brand has strong net zero commitments and they're looking for that from their supply chain, and so if you're an agency or an organizer, you'll get more business by doing sustainability the right way. And if you're creating exhibitions, then your attendees are going to be expecting it of you. So it's not about being perfect. And I think that you just need to be honest. And I think I've spoken to a lot of big organizers who shy away from talking about sustainability at all because they don't think they're doing very well, but you get a lot more respect to kind of open up and say where you are on your journey, and where, it's not about shaming people. It's about kind of championing the people that are doing well and spurring everybody else on to get there, rather than kind of burying your head under the sand until it's too late.
Absolutely. I really do think it's currently it's quite a good marketing tool as well. Like you said, people are winning contracts based on their sustainability policies. I think people like hearing about positive news about sustainability. We've been constantly being hammered by everyone about climate change and how we must do more. And this is everyone's opportunity to do their part and promote it. And like you said, some of your people that use your platform are winning contracts purely over other people because of their sustainability plans. You're not even going to get through to the second round of cuts without having the sustainability plan on some tenders. So I think about that education for those that are coming up in the industry. Measurement and just doing better in every event that you do. I think we've had some really good advice from all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. We've had some great dialogue on event sustainability, really good advice on the future, really easy things to implement tomorrow. It's not something that takes masses of planning. You're doing a catering menu, you can change that to make it more sustainable. You put the pressure on your suppliers to join in your way of thinking. We are also going to be partnering with Tree Nation, which is one of the projects on here. And we'll be planting one tree on behalf of everyone that's attended this webinar. So please do keep an eye out on your email and learn how we're going to offset a few of our carbon emissions from this event today. This webinar obviously is not the only part of the platform. We explained at the start, we've got the exhibition area where our team from both vFairs and Interprefy will be down at a booth. You can download all the content. They have this great feature called called a swag bag. You can browse through all the information. You can add it all to your bag, and once you're finished, just hit the download button. I think you get a link to download the content afterwards. And we also have the lounge as well, which has some information, all the companies that are involved today: Interprefy, vFairs, Isla, Event Tech Live. So there's lots of things to do after this webinar. So thank you very much to all our panelists today: Adam Parry, Event Industry News and Event Tech Live, Baron Quarrel from Isla, Mohammed and Wasif from vFairs. My name is Mark. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you have a great afternoon, evening or morning ahead, depending on where you are. Thanks very much, guys.